The Korean constitution, without a doubt, I personally have seen a lot of acupuncture over 50 years. I still think it works almost magical. I've seen some cases where just those 4 points have had such a drastic turnaround, even sometimes without any herbs.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. It's scary when you bet on yourself. It's scary because you're not playing with Monopoly money. It's not a simulated computer game. The consequences are real. When you're wrong, it will hurt. And when you're right, it can lead to overconfidence and carelessness. Acquiring understanding through the course correction of learning from mistakes, it's painful, but it does bring clarity. Success serves up its own challenges with not being able to discern ability from luck. And just because you seem to have it right in the past, that doesn't mean the future won't have other surprises in store. Betting on yourself means showing your work in public. It means opening yourself to the criticism of others when you're wrong and their jealousy when you're right. The Colosseum of Rome is as alive today in our socially mediated world as it was centuries ago when people enjoyed gladiators for their blood sport. People that care about you get worried when you bet on yourself because it means that you're pushing the edges of comfort. You're asking for troubles that are worth having. And the people that care about you, they don't like to see you suffer, which most assuredly you will when you take risks on your own behalf. Here's the other thing. When you double down on something that might not work, it leads to developing courage. And when you take risks that others don't, it shows them where they're fearful. Nobody likes to have this pointed out. Taking risks makes you look smart and foresighted if things work out. And maybe you are. Perhaps you really do see what others don't. But keep in mind that no one likes to profit in their own time. And beyond that, even if you do see the glimmering possibility of something that others don't, executing on what you've never done, it's not so easy. You might be right in your vision and wrong in 100 unexpected ways as you bring that glimmer into manifest reality. It's not easy, and it might be one of life's little koans, because if you don't bet on yourself, nobody else will. Unless you're interested in the lowest level of service job, you're going to need a modicum of confidence and a track record of being able to solve problems. And the best place to start with solving problems is with your own. Working on your own behalf is not selfishness. It's a psycho-spiritual cultivation. It shows the universe you're open for business, and you mean it. You could say that you're asking for trouble, and you are, but it's the kind of trouble worth having. The kind that makes you a little dangerous, smarter, and more trustworthy. Closing the loopholes of excuse and misdirected attention, it will ignite your jur and polish your shen. You won't recognize yourself on the other side. But actually, yes, you will. Stepping into the unknown, it will make your heart beat faster. It's a kind of yang tonic that will invigorate all your senses. It taps out bursts of adrenaline that can be used to fuel your anxiety or your focus and capacity for action. 50 years ago, following the path of learning acupuncture as a Westerner was not for the faint of heart. You needed a high tolerance for risk, a strong sense of inquisitiveness, and a taste for novelty. Jacques MoraMarco had all of this, and he still does. In this History Series conversation, we learn something of the influence of European culture on the development of acupuncture in the West, and how the Korean tradition, as for many in his generation, was a significant influence. There's more too, and we'll get into it in just a moment. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-qualty herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Jacques MoraMarco, welcome to Qiological.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me here.
I'm delighted to have you. You've been at this stuff for a few years, haven't you?
Well, over 50 years.
Over 50 years. All right. Well, it's a good thing that we have you here on the History Podcast because, 50 years that's not a small amount of time. I want to wind back the clock a little bit. I would love to know where you were and what was going on in your life. In fact, if you could give us some context, what was going on in the world around you? Like, what were the issues of the day? As young people, we always have some burning issue that's going on or something that's got our attention. What was going on in your life when you first heard about acupuncture?
Well, it was during the time of the Vietnam War. So, and there's some interesting connection between Vietnam and my path into this medicine. So where most people might think it's some Chinese connection or Japanese or Korean, it was really the Vietnamese path that led me to the profession of acupuncture. So going back in the early 70s, I was in pre-med at Loyola University here in Los Angeles, right up the hill from Empress College here in, well, it's Marina del Rey area in West LA. And during that time, I was deeply involved in Chinese and Japanese martial arts. Zen meditation, shiatsu was my first encounter with this medicine. My first sensei was actually a practitioner of Japanese martial arts, but Zen meditation and shiatsu. So that's when I first experienced the effects of acupressure, or in this case, shiatsu. And that opened up some interest, and still going towards the path of going to medical school. At that point, my father told me that he had an experience with acupuncture, and we're talking 1973, 4. So here it was just opening up with the bamboo curtain with Nixon going to China. So they just had first heard about it here. But in France, it was very well established. And he had acupuncture by this Vietnamese doctor, Dr. Nhu Tan. He was a researcher at the Marie Curie Institute for Cancer Research, but he was an acupuncturist. So every evening he would see his own patients, and he would treat one patient at a time. And my father said that this was the most incredible experience he had. He went for very severe hay fever allergy, and this doctor had so much warmth and compassion. He would take the pulse and would keep his fingers on my father's pulse after he placed about, he said, 3 needles on some type of points in between the elbows and the fingers, and 3 points between the knees and the toes. And at one point or another, he would replace the needles, but he would never leave the pulse while he was talking to the patient, always next to the patient. And he had 3 visits that virtually changed his life. After those 3 sessions, he never, ever had another hay fever allergy attack. And he was really miserable. He would sneeze 200-300 times during the pollen season. So it was really the early days. There were no schools in the United States. I was living in the United States at the time. And one day I was at a bookstore called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore. It was a very small bookstore in West LA. And I saw a little notice, a handwritten notice, Korean teacher accepting 2 students for apprenticeship of the art of acupuncture. But it wasn't legalized. It was not legal yet.
No.
It was in the early days prior to the establishment of acupuncture by Jerry Brown, Governor Brown. He was the one that basically was lobbied and petitioned by some of the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese community, and of course, Vietnamese community. And at that point, I connected with Se-Han Kim, which some of the audience might have heard about Peter Ekman's journey, and the very first acupuncture clinics that were done by this West Coast Medical. And Se-Han Kim, this Korean teacher, was brought from Korea at that time, and he started teaching just a couple of these students. And I was lucky enough to have been among those very few students that he started teaching without knowing one word of English. He did not know one word of English, by the way. So we had this.
And you didn't know any Korean?
No, I did not know Korean. The only thing I remember is the word yogi, meaning this. That was an interesting word to remember. But this translator was also an amazing translator. He was a Zen monk. His name was Satamli. And this Zen monk, who happened to also have been at the International Buddhist Meditation Center, where I was actually living at the time, he would never lay down and sleep. He would always be sitting in meditative practices. I've never seen him lay down, because I used to live at the center, and I would step out sometime in the middle of the night, maybe go and get some water or just get some fresh air, and he would be sitting in meditation. Never lay down, always sit in meditation. Amazing monk also. So Docky would go by the master, but I call him Dr. Kim or Se-Han Kim. He actually had studied acupuncture at a monastery in what is now North Korea, because at that time, acupuncture was not allowed to be practiced during the Japanese period. Pre-World War II, it was banned in Korea, only Western medicine, but it was kept in a monastic setting. So he was
That's interesting. They're so...
taken to the monastery at that time, and because of his health, and he ended up living there like 10 years or so. So that was how he got started with this whole acupuncture. And then eventually, after a number of years, he started speaking English, but very broken English, very, very broken English, because he was probably already in his, I would say, maybe early 40s when he came.
Okay.
Yeah, so he already had like at least 20 years experience behind him.
All right. Now, okay, so you're headed to pre-med. You're doing pre-med. You're headed in the direction of Western medicine.
Yes, absolutely.
Your dad has had a great experience with acupuncture. That was an influence.
That's right.
You're doing meditation and shiatsu. You're kind of an alternative sort of guy. There's this note, I'm accepting students. Like, what were they doing? Were they charging for this, or?
Yeah, it was.
What was their motivation to teach acupuncture?
Yeah, it was just a small little class. There was a charge. I don't even remember. It was over 50 years ago. And, I just wanted to teach this incredible Korean practice. Now, I'm saying Korean because the root of his practice ended up being the 8th constitution of Dr. Kwando, which was the root of his practice.
I was wondering.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the depth of his knowledge on herbs and on the functioning of the points and the name of the points, he had such a mastery of the names and the interpretation of each point, what it really meant. And that was really amazing. I experienced that firsthand with him. And so time went by. I was working. Yes.
Okay, wait, hang on a second. I want to dig into this just a bit, because this is like a precious little gem here. You have this opportunity to study with this guy from Korea. I'm curious to know, how did he teach it? Right. I suspect there weren't books. Was it like lectures? Was it doing the work? And beyond that, is there like a particular style that you would say it was that you were first exposed to? Most of us learn TCM. It sounds like you were exposed to something else. I'm curious to know. I didn't think it would be.
It was not TCM. It was definitely not TCM. It was Korean based. So if you can say, it was closer to the 4-needle techniques for some of the audience, the Sa'am acupuncture, but it was really the 8 constitutions. Now, yes, there were very few books in English. There was the original book from Felix Mann from the 1960s, English physician that wrote some books very early on. Of course, was way, way before the web that has no Weaver and Tej Kapchak, which I actually went to his classes in London. I think it was like 1979 or 80 when he was teaching in London. And I was fortunate enough that I could read the French books. So the Neijing was already translated. And talking about the Vietnamese connection, there was also this Dr. Van Nie. His brother-in-law had about 20 to 30 translators that would translate the Chinese text into Vietnamese, then from Vietnamese into French. So there was a lot of these texts that were being translated into French. And let's not forget that in the 1920s, Souillet de Moran, which was the French consul, had gone to China. He came back, and acupuncture was starting to be quite accepted by the medical profession, mostly by homeopathic physicians. And, you had students like Niboyer and all those first generation of acupuncturists that studied with Souillet de Moran. They were medical doctors, and mostly they were homeopaths and medical doctors. And also there was another very interesting thing that happened in France. They had these points called the Way points, Weihe, and there were some trigger points that were discovered by this German homeopathic physician that matched the acupuncture point. There were about 180 of these, and each point matched the homeopathic remedies. So they did a lot of research with these so-called waypoints, or these specific homeopathic trigger points, and matched them to specific remedies. And they had homeopathic remedies such as opium matched with large intestine 4. So in his book from the 1950s, Niboyer talks about this point. And this point was 30 years before the endorphin and caffeines were discovered at the University of San Francisco in the early 70s. They knew that that point would enhance the same effect as opium, large intestine 4.
It's so fascinating to me how something like acupuncture, it travels through time. We know that, right? Thousands of years of experience. But it's so fascinating to me how it will travel also across cultures.
Yes.
Right? Into Vietnam, okay, we can understand that. They're next door neighbors. Into France, all right, colonization, we can see how that happens. Gets to France, and now you see this influence because it's being studied by homeopathic doctors. They're like, okay, how can we use acupuncture and homeopathy? Like, how do these two things go together? It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, and
that humans are like this, right? We're just constantly innovating.
And absolutely, and let's not forget Dr. Paul Nogier, who is the originator of auricular therapy, as accepted even by the Chinese modern government. They credit him 100% for developing auricular therapy, which is slightly different than the French system, than the Chinese system. Without getting too much in detail, he was also a neurologist and he was also a homeopath. So he was a neurologist and a homeopath. And also he had some background in electrical engineering. So there have some of these fascinating French doctors I met, like Dr. Musa, who was one of the teachers of Johans, who taught the medical acupuncture courses in the early 80s. Dr. Musa was a medical doctor, but he also was an expert in mathematics and the I Ching and had a PhD in astrophysics. So there were these unbelievable doctors that were from that time frame that had multiple degrees, in pharmacology or physics or mathematics, and also in medicine. Yeah.
So interesting. I often think about acupuncture here in the States being sort of kicked off by a bunch of hippies.
Wow.
Right? People that were into alternative health and diet and this and that, right? Kind of hippies. And I listened to you tell the story of France. You got astrophysicists and electrical engineers and very, sort of intelligentsia.
Absolutely.
Who were drawn to this. So
absolutely.
I could see how that would get a very different flavor. So interesting.
It had a very interesting flavor. And again, a few years down the roads after taking the first California acupuncture exam, 1977, I moved back to Europe and I was in London for 3 years, and I would commute, monthly basis to Paris to continue my studies at the École Européenne d'Acupuncture, which was run at that time by Père Lard, who was a foremost Chinese scholar, which had at that time a very young assistant named Elisabeth Rochat de la Vallée. Rochat de la Vallée was with him for 30 years. She was with Père Lard for 30 years as the assistant and co-teacher. And then there was this physician named Jean Schatz, who I spent time with in Paris at the time. And he already had been almost 40 years in practice of acupuncture. Can you believe it? In the mid-70s, he already had 40 years of practice, going back, to around the time of World War II. So it was the early days there.
Well, again, in France, they had a head start. Absolutely, because of course, Vietnam and the classics. They had the classical text. They wanted to know more about the breakdown on the Chinese character and the linguistic, and they had foremost sinologue, the Chinese scholars that would help them to do these translations also. Mm-hmm. So you started learning with Dr. Kim.
Sehan Kim, yes.
And then what happened?
Then I was here in the United States. I took my state board examination.
Now, just from that study with him?
Yeah, I only had him as my primary student, and I also spent some time with Steve Rosenblatt, the National Acupuncture Association. They were also doing some courses, and I was doing some supplemental training with him. Steve Rosenblatt, who was one of the early, I would say, hippies. He ended up afterwards going to medical school and finishing up, of course, his PhD at UCLA in psychology. But he ended up being one of the early pioneers of this medicine and establishing the California Acupuncture College in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and San Diego. And in San Diego, that school became the Pacific College, basically. So it converted to the Pacific College in the mid-'80s, I would say.
Yeah.
Mid-'80s, yes.
So what did you need to know about acupuncture back when you first took the exam?
What I needed to know about acupuncture is very interesting, because when I took that first exam, there was no multiple choice question. It was an oral exam in front of a panel of examiners who happened to have been board acupuncture members. So there was Dr. Cronin. He was the medical director of the acupuncture project at UCLA. So he was an MD, PhD. And then there was, I don't remember the other examiners. There was maybe it was a Japanese examiner and maybe a Vietnamese examiner or a Korean examiner. I believe there were 3 examiners. So the exam consisted of this. You would first fly to the area of San Bruno near San Jose, California. You arrived there. You had no preparation because there was no exam ever given. So what to do, what not to do. You had to bring your kit with you. So the most important thing that you had to be aware of on your examination in terms of your kit, that it had to be autoclaved properly with your autoclave clave. And at that time, they wanted to know all the details of the operational function of the autoclave. How many pounds per square inch? What is the temperature? All those specifics, which, of course, I can hardly remember that. That's almost 50 years ago.
Of course not. They wanted to make sure you weren't using dirty needles because they didn't have disposables back then.
Not at all. Actually, the disposable needles didn't come till, I would say, the mid-'80s. The mid-'80s, maybe the early '80s. So they were all autoclavable needles. They were all autoclaved, and we had our kits. It was myself, and there was 2 other students of Sehan Kim. His name is the late Mark Holmes. He passed right around the end of the COVID time, and there was another student named Dennis Kessler, and that's it. We were 3 Westerners taking the exam. There were no other Westerners taking this exam. Whoever was licensed prior to that, they were grandfathered in. Like my teacher, he was grandfathered in being, I think his license was 77 or 78, the California acupuncture license. And then there was like Steve Rosenblatt, because he worked at UCLA, he was licensed, I think license 140 or something like that. So very few licensees. And then they had this first group of students that took it. They were maybe from Korea. There was nobody from mainland China because China was still pretty closed. And there were quite a few Japanese and some Vietnamese doctors. Now, I just wanted to point out that the multi-language exam that was administered by the state of California in the early days was in Japanese and Vietnamese. Specifically, the Vietnamese component was because of what had happened in 1975. A lot of the medical staff from Vietnam, there were maybe physicians. They couldn't really go through medical school here, so they had a pathway to earn a career, make a living, and most of them had been exposed to maybe acupuncture and did some further studies, so they took the California acupuncture exam. Yeah. So when you got to the examination and the examiner, what they would say, okay, I'm your patient, I have XY symptoms, take my pulse. There was no looking at my tongue. Take my pulse, tell me what I need and what you're going to do about this, whatever they were complaining. I mean, it might have been insomnia or frontal headache. And now open your kit and treat me.
Wow.
That's it. And you better have been very steady with your hands and been not at all stressed because,
yes,
you had these 3 examiners, a highly respected professor from UCLA and these 2 other expert acupuncturists from either Japan or Vietnam or Korea. And there you were. So those were the very first exams that were given in that fashion. And after that, then a few years later, they started having some type of multiple choice exam and practicum up to about the year 1999. After 1999, there was no more practicum in terms of herbs identification and point location. It was just written. So it's been no practice.
Oh, you wouldn't have to like put your hands on and show them where the point was after 1999?
Yeah, that's right. In the last 25 years, it's only been a written exam. There's no more.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. So that is only happened since 1999. I think in the year 2000, the exam just became strictly. Yeah, there was a lot of controversy because some of the patients, the model they got, they might have been overweight. There was some discussion and debate on the exact location of the point because of body size proportion. So that created a lot of controversy and some I think maybe even had some legal cases against the examiners because they said, no, the point is located here. And I don't know what the margin of error was. But anyways, so it went all written. No hands-on whatsoever.
Okay. But that's not what you faced. You faced...
No, I faced...
Here's what we got. Show me what you got.
That's right. Yeah. So
that's kind of cool. Now...
And then they would ask you a question, I think they would go and ask you in such and such chapter of the Nanjing, this was mentioned. What do you say about this? It wasn't just that. Then they say, well, the Neijing says this. What? Tell us a little bit about what you know about this particular chapter.
Now, did you have to? I mean, how did you study the Neijing back at that point?
There was a translation from Henry Lou from Canada in English.
Mm-hmm.
I think came out in 1974. So there was that translation, and he had the Nanjing. I also had the French translation. I think it was Chanfro's translation.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd read it before. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
What were those first days like working as a practitioner?
Well, my first days working as a practitioner is that once I got licensed, I moved back to Europe. So I lived in London, and I would be working as a practitioner in London. At that time, they had the British Acupuncture Council. Basically, if you were licensed in another country and had a proper credential, you'd be vetted and cleared to practice. You did not have to do any examination. It was like through a registry. And that's how it went. And in those days, believe it or not, the majority of cases you would see would not be the standard pain control, but more related to internal medicine, to insomnia. You get insomnia, allergies, gastrointestinal, like what we see as IBS, and all those type of issues that you would be treating. But, yes, you would get the tennis elbow and sciatica and, musculoskeletal problem. But mostly you would do some internal medicine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, what drew you to London?
Oh, I had some family there at the time, and that's how I ended up in London. I was always wanted to experience being there. It was such a center of especially homeopathy. And at that time, I studied homeopathy in London with Dr. Johar, who was a homeopath. And he was a homeopath from the Indian tradition of homeopaths, which at that time, I don't know do you know the homeopathic materia medica called Boroki? It's a small little book. It's a book. It's I don't know. It's 800 pages. Well, as a child, because his father and his grandfather was one of the homeopath of one of the Raj, he was tasked to memorize this book, so he would know every single remedy in the book. He would know the whole book by heart. So he could tell you that on page 458 on the bottom there's a side note for the function of this homeopathic remedy. And
wow,
it was quite amazing. Yeah, so he was a homeopath, and I was able to study with him there, which was really, really interesting. Plus, British society was very open to acupuncture and homeopathy. Let's not forget that Worsley had a school there. And of course, Van Buren had a school there. So that was the time of Giovanni Maciaccia was finishing up his studies at that school when I was there. And all those early days, authors, they were all there, in England at the time, which was an interesting time.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Again, another vital moment of Chinese medicine emerging into Western culture.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
It seemed to happen in America and the UK, roughly the same time.
Yeah. I think America came a little bit later. The UK was a little bit ahead of its time because they also had some connection with France. So some of the things were translated from the French. And of course, Professor Worsley, he had gone to Japan and Korea and developed this 5-elemental acupuncture, which was his vision on synthesizing some of those ideas and thoughts from those particular schools, mostly from Japan and Korea.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you study with some of these folks while you were in?
No, I did. I did not study with either one of those when I was in England because I was already a practitioner and I was mostly focused on my constitutional acupuncture treatment. So what I did study is when I used to go to Paris in France, I studied some of the auricular acupuncture with Dr. Nogier. Well, I was fortunate enough to take a class with Dr. Nogier, and that was a life-changing class for me because that's when he actually presented the phases, which is a specific view of the auricular therapy. And that actually was part of my early days in terms of my OMD dissertation, which ended up to be my DOM dissertation, the understanding of the ear point, ear shen men to the Nogier phase 2, which is the thalamus. So ear shen men is the thalamus, and there's plenty of evidence to prove that. But that was Nogier's view of the auricular, and of course...
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's...
Because I think our listeners may not be that familiar. I mean, maybe they've heard of Nogier, but this sounds like an interesting little bit that he's contributed.
Yeah, of course, he was an amazing, as I mentioned, physician, neurologist. He in the 1950s, when he was treating patients with acupuncture, he was also doing osteopathy. He saw some of these patients who had this scar on the auricle, which was basically on the anti-helix below the triangular fossa. Some of the listener might know that part, that anatomical part of the ear. And he saw this scar, and the patients would come to see him, and he said, I had a treatment by this specific practitioner in Marseille that did this cauterization on this point. And then he said, with his osteopathic background, he said, if there's a problem with a sciatica, let me think, it could be L5-S1 area. So with his research background and his interesting idea of electrical engineering and being a neurologist, he actually reverse engineered and said that is the L5-S1 area. Then he mapped out the spine, mapped out different parts of the body like shoulder, and he tested them out. And one of the interesting tests about that he would do in some of his workshop, if individuals would not believe that this acupuncture was real and worked, he would take a participant's hand, specifically maybe the thumb, and place it in a type of a clipboard with some padding and put pressure on it. So it was somewhat painful. And then he would go and touch the point in the ear that relates to the thumb. He would release the clipboard, and the point in the ear, the sensitivity would totally disappear. And that is the most interesting aspect. That, of course, before the fMRI and all the new devices that they have to test out, the validity of these points and how they relate to different areas of the brain. But so he was,
Now, wait a minute. So he would do this with various parts of the body?
Well, yeah, he would test out the body. And of course, for a demonstration sake, he would only do it on the thumb in terms of that pressure. But in terms of him testing out different parts of the body until he discovered the whole map. That was the original so-called head down, or the original inverted fetus map that everybody has seen in acupuncture. Eventually, in 1979, he actually discovered the upright man, so that there is more than just one view of the ear with the head down and basically reverse fetus, but actually upright man, where the head is where the triangular fossa is, on the upper part of the auricle. And when you look at Shen Men, and you look at all the functions that the ear point Shen Men does, you can see for certainty that it has nothing to do with the hip or the gua or that area around gallbladder 30, which is anatomically where it's located, but it really has the functions of the point of the thalamus, which is in this
of the upright man.
Yeah, upright man, which is interesting enough because independently, this point, the French translation of that point, which Nogier discovered in probably the early 60s, was called the cosmonaut point. He called it the cosmonaut point.
The cosmonaut point?
Yeah, because of Gagarin.
The space adventurer point.
Yeah, because that was to acknowledge the first man in space, which was a cosmonaut named Gagarin from Russia, from the Soviet Union. So he named it that because of its extraordinary effects. But at that time, he did not know that was the upright man. In China, around the same time, of course, no communication, no internet, no phone communication, they had discovered one of these points called Shen point. It was not called Shen Men. It was called Shen. Shen point was a point specifically and only for insomnia. There was no other indication. It was only...
And where's that one located?
It's the same point. It's Shen Men.
Oh, Shen Men. Okay.
Yeah, but it was not called Shen Men. The original discovery by these professors in the 1960s was not called Shen Men. But it was around the same time. So these two things developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the most used point in auricular acupuncture. Unfortunately, the difficulty with the location of that point is that everyone's triangular fossa is somewhat different. So you cannot say, okay, there's a standard location, at the edge of the triangular fossa. And if you take 10 acupuncture charts, we put them next to each other, none of them match because of the drawing of the triangular fossa. By the way, before I became a U.S. citizen, I used to have this, they call it the green card. And what was very important at that time was to take a picture which was a sideways picture, so you would expose your ear. So the ear was the identification process because they did not have fingerprints on these cards, and they did not have all the metrics and the bio identification. So they would use the ear is one thing that you would not basically to have cosmetic surgery to change your looks. It was an identification marker in the early days because every ear is different. And even today...
That's fascinating.
Yeah, even today when in some areas of the world they have body doubles for some of the leaders, one of the key things is if you look at the ears, they're not the same. The body doubles might look the same, but the ears are not the same.
The ears, okay, so we can watch for the body doubles. We can recognize them.
The body doubles, yeah. Just look at the ears, and okay, that ear is slightly different. If you can get a good look at it. Yeah, we have to be very careful on who we talk about.
Now, you were doing this Korean constitutional acupuncture.
Yes. The 8 Constitution.
Kind of for needle-ish.
It is. It's the 8 Constitution from Dr. Kwon Do.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Most of us, again, study TCM. Korean acupuncture, I know it's been in the country, but it certainly hasn't had the same penetration into.
It has not. It has not. It has not because, it stayed in this small little area of Korean medicine. And let's not forget that most Korean medical doctors, KMDs, they used to be called OMDs, but then it changed to KMD, Korean medical doctors. They go to a 6-year schooling in Korea. So the first 4 years are the same as medical school, basically doing all the same bioscience. And then they do more specialization in acupuncture and herbal medicine. These individuals in Korea, their standard of living is at the same level as an MD. They don't want to emigrate out of Korea. So it stayed there. It stayed pretty much locked into that country for now, I would say almost 50 years. Now, they had recently this summer a specific meeting at Chattawau. It's a Native American word that the First Nation used, like a gathering of individual on Korean medicine. They had it this summer here in the United States. So many Korean acupuncturist practitioners got to meet.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
The Saam Chautauqua?
Yeah, that's Saam Chautauqua. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. We put that on at Geological.
That's what I'm talking about. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes. We had a number of doctors from Korea. It was a real delight to have them.
Yeah. So you had quite a few individuals there. As a matter of fact, one of my doctoral fellows here at Empress College, a DOM fellow, he was part of that meeting for some doctoral hours. He was doing some research on Korean acupuncture, Korean constitution. Here at Empress College, we do offer one of the tracks on Korean medicine, which is quite unique, is that you take all the TCM classes, but you can also focus into a Korean shift. So Korean. So in that Chautauqua, they had different practitioners, but that was the first time I heard that, all these people are practicing some form of 4-needle techniques, a new variation of the 4-needle technique. But Sehan Kim kept with the 8 constitution. Now, the difficulty with the 8 constitution, that is a pulse base, where you take at position 4, 5, and 6, you compress the artery, you let go of the artery, and then you see where it hits first, on which digit it hits first. With that, you can determine the constitution. So if you're like a weak stomach type, or weak large intestine type, or a weak kidney type, depending on that. And then you go on to use what the traditional 4-needle Saam points are. So let's say if you're a weak stomach constitution, that means with the pulse, then you would only treat those 4 points. You don't need to treat anything but those 4 points, which are...
So you would tonify the stomach?
Yes, with not stomach 36, with stomach 41, the fire point on the stomach channel. So, and then you would tonify small intestine 5, which is the mother fire point. And then you sedate the co-cycle, the controller, which is gallbladder 41, which is the wood point on the wood meridian, which is the controller, and stomach 43, which is the wood point on the stomach channel. And that's the technique. That is the crux of this constitution, those 4 points. Now, there's some new variations of the Saam where they would use maybe 1 or 2 of these controllers, or one I'm not too aware of. For me, this has worked very well. And when I said worked very well, I'm talking about treating patients during the height of the AIDS epidemics. Back in the 80s, I used to live in Palm Springs, which is a few years after what we started on. I was still in Europe, in London, but we jumped the clock, and now I'm in Palm Springs treating AIDS patients, and it made a big difference. Some of them actually were able to go up to the mid-90s, where they were originally given the 18 months lifespan. 18 months was your average lifespan once you were diagnosed with the HIV virus, which at that time was full-blown AIDS, or ARC, AIDS-related symptom complex. And, of course, there are certain herbs in our early days, things like Health Concern Astra 8 would be dispensed, or Subhuti Dharmananda, he would have one other combination that he would be very, very... it was very well accepted by the AIDS community, and some people were able to extend their lifespan up to when those medication, those cocktails came about. So it was a difficult time, but it really proved that you can do so much with this medicine. And of course, it brings us to present day, which is long COVID. How can you treat long COVID using the same principle as we used to use treating those AIDS patients?
Yeah. So what is your thoughts on treating long COVID with acupuncture?
Well,
Are you using the Korean constitutional medicine? That's the satsang, right?
No, Sa'am.
Oh no! I understand the sa'am is the 4-needle technique.
Yeah, I'm using the
But you were talking about Korean constitutional acupuncture.
Yeah, I'm using the Dr. Kwan eight methods, 8 constitutional types. Yeah.
Okay.
The 8 constitutional types. Now, I personally, I'm not really treating too many patients because I'm the academic dean here at Empress College. And the only thing that I'm doing is I am treating combat veterans at the Veterans Administration, the West LA VA. We have an externship for doctoral fellows for the combat track. So I'm treating PTSD. That's what, and I'm using the Korean constitutional points for the PTSD, including auricular points and other techniques that we can use. But there's no herbs being used. So I cannot give you my personal experiences, but I know practitioners that get very positive results with long COVID for all those long COVID symptoms with acupuncture and, of course, with herbal medicine. Yeah. Definitely, there's a big place for us. And I think more and more research, evidence-based research will show that it does really work.
Yes. Well, I think many of us have seen in our clinics.
Yes.
That it's very helpful. So your initial introduction to acupuncture was this Korean constitutional medicine.
Absolutely.
And this is still the core of how you practice.
Yes. I did not feel any need for change. However, I just don't do that. I, of course, do the auricular or auricular acupuncture. And I also was fortunate enough to study some type of osteopathic medicine. So I do some cranial unwinding on the patient. I'm talking just a VA because I'm not treating any other patients. I'm the academic dean here at Empress College. So mostly I do administrative work, except on Tuesdays I'm in the front lines at the VA treating the patients. I do the overflow for our interns. So, we have so many patients there that very often I take some extra patients so I can treat them.
It's fun to keep your hands in it, isn't it?
Yeah, and I also worked 6 years at one of our externships. Empress College had an externship called Being Alive. It was one of the very first HIV/AIDS support group clinics in West Hollywood. So I used it for 6 years every Monday on my HIV patients. At that time, they had the cocktails and everybody was being medicated, but they still had some symptoms, and I would use the Korean Constitution. The Korean Constitution, without a doubt, I personally have seen a lot of acupuncture over 50 years. I still think it works almost magical. I've seen some cases where just those 4 points have had such a drastic turnaround, even sometimes without any herbs. Because when you give all the herbal formula, so what is it? Is it the acupuncture that's doing, or is it the herbs? So, sometimes when you see these drastic effects just with the 4 needles, you're just, even after 50 years of practice, I am myself surprised on the results. Now,
I believe you.
I'm thinking of this one patient that had at a VA who had some nerve gas exposure in the Gulf War, the 1990s war in Kuwait, and had all type of exposures, and had, as a Marine, he had so many exposures to that, and then he was in Afghanistan, and he had so many traumas and so many issues with his health. The 4-needle technique had like a miraculous turnaround where he used to come in basically with a walker. Within 6 months, he was able to walk normally without a walker, without a cane, and his life has changed. Just an example that happened this last year, which I'm surprised. How can this happen? Because there's no herbs being dispensed at the VA. We have to just give what we are allowed, which is the acupuncture.
Yes. Well, I can tell you, since I learned some Sa'am acupuncture probably 6 years ago now, using it quite a bit in my practice, 4-needle technique, it's it's stunning. And I think in part it's stunning because you're really whatever meridian it is or organ system.
Yes.
That you want to tonify, you're like totally powering it up, right? You're tonifying its mother. You're tonifying the mother point on the channel that you want to tonify.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then you take the brakes off of the control.
Absolutely.
You know, it reminds me, I used to live in Seattle. I don't know if they have these guys, these bike messengers where you live. But in Seattle, we had these bike messengers. And we had these big hills in Seattle. And these bike messengers would ride bikes, like single speed bikes with no damn brakes.
Really?
You know, because they're like cool bike messengers, you know, and they do their bike tricks, but their bikes didn't have brakes. And it always seemed to me that the 4-needle technique was kind of like that. It's like it's all go and there's no damn brakes on it, which very powerfully will change things.
Yeah, Sehan Kim, my teacher, he had a very, very interesting way of explaining things. Again, you know, with his limited English later on, but mostly with a translation. He says those are those elemental points on the channels. They're just like those radio tower transmitters. So you want to decrease that transmission, just shut down the wood energy coming towards the earth. You just shut down that tower, and then you can give the earth energy, that earth station, to come up. So he had this very interesting diagram with his towers he put up on the board. Look at the tower yogi, meaning look at this, the tower chi, the key would go into this meridian, and just it's an amazing system. I've seen so many acupuncturists, so many different styles. I still, in my opinion, I like this style, the 4-needle technique. Now, there was one.
Well, you've stuck with it. You've stuck with it for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've stuck with it for 50 years. There is one.
No pun intended.
Yeah, there's one other thing that I have wanted to share with you, because was one doctor in Paris. His name is Dr. Maurice Trinquant. He was a student of Van Nye, the very famous MD physician he was in Marseille at the time. He passed. The key physician that brought a lot of the translated work from, at that time, was North Vietnam to France. He basically discovered this point. They call it the Baiwei. Baiwei is Baiwei in the old French translation, the Governor 20, which is not located where we think it's located in our TCM diagrams. In this closer to, let's say, Governor's 1917, he would treat a patient. This Dr. Trinquant, he would treat a patient with this point, 1 point behind the head.
1 point.
Yeah.
By way.
Yeah.
But not where we do it. It's a little bit.
Not the class. No. It was individual. He would palpate it, and he would find a depression right at that cranium fold. And it's basically, if any of your audience wants to see where it's located, if you go onto YouTube and you would punch in the word Powa retreat, it's a Tibetan retreat. Powa, P-O-W-A, retreat. It's a 3-minute or 2-minute audio where the individuals that do this Tibetan practice of transferring the soul at the moment of passing, they would get a soft point, and there is a blade of grass that is put on that point that stays in the point, not a needle, just a blade of grass. It's an amazing video. It's more or less in that area, this power point. So this Dr. Maurice Trinquant would put the point in. Now, most of the patients, they would come for stress, insomnia, any type of neuroemotional problems. They will be totally knocked out for maybe 40 to 45 minutes. For the next few days, they will be sleeping a lot. After that, they'll go back totally into homeostasis. Whatever problem they had has been resolved. I was told that by one of my friends. I said, I don't believe it that this is possible. And it was in the early 80s, maybe it was 82, 83. I got in touch with him. I went to see him. And I spent 2 weeks every day with him in the clinic. He was seeing about 40 patients a day. Most incredible results, just with 1 point.
And this is all this guy did is just one point?
Yeah, mostly one point. Maybe he might do another point if there was, he has the points he call les points fusibles, mean the fuse box point. He might do one or two trigger point if somebody had a
Fuse box point.
yeah, it's called les points fusibles.
That's funny. Fuse box point. I like that.
Fuse box point. Like TP, like myofascial trigger points, and he would do, maybe a couple of these points. Like if somebody had like a whiplash, he might do a couple of those points on the cranium area, on this tender, so-called myofascial trigger points, and the byway. But the byway was the core of his practice, and the effects were unbelievable. So there's a lot of possibilities, and I also studied the Korean hand acupuncture. So I do use the Korean hand moxa treatment for my own use. I've used it for 40 years, and I use it as a preventative measure to boost my immune system during cold and flu and COVID during the fall and winter season. I used that for 40 years. I do like to use the moxa, but of course, moxa nowadays, most medical suites, of course, not at the VA. You cannot use it. So for personal use, I do. I'm a big believer of moxa.
Right. So now, do you use those little stick-on moxas?
Yes, stick-on moxa on the Korean.
Little Korean stick-on moxa.
Yeah, on the Korean hand points, which mostly are in what we would think of the pericardium channel. That's the Ren channel. The pericardium channel on the Korean hand is the Ren channel. So, like closely from P. Yeah.
That's interesting that the pericardium and the Ren are the same channel.
Yeah, our main pericardium channel. Yes. So basically, the tip of the middle finger is in Korean acupuncture. That's Korean hand acupuncture. It has a different numbering system. That's 833, which would be governor 20. And the base ones would be CV1, of course. But it's very easy to use a CV1 on the hand where, here in California, I wouldn't feel too comfortable doing CV1 on a patient.
I can't imagine wanting to put that point in anybody, really, given...
Well, actually, in Beijing, which I'm sure you're familiar with, there was one doctor in Beijing 30, 40 years ago. He was a specialist of prostate issues, and he would put a 2-3 inch needle depth on this CV1, and people would line up outside his office to come and get this treatment. Yeah, and they would get that treatment, I think, standing, not laying down. Yeah.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of qi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Yeah. But when I think about modern practice, and I think about how many different ways we have of approaching a point.
Yeah. Well, that point, yeah.
And lawsuits and liability, it just...
No, that point in the United States, it's not appropriate to do. You will be sued. It's not a point you would do.
Yeah. So tell me a little more about the treatment that you do for yourself to stay healthy with the Korean hand acupuncture.
Well, number one, yeah, that's the standard treatment that is done, Korean hand acupuncture, where you do the 7 moxa cone on the basic points on this Ren channel, like CV4, CV6, CV12. Those are the key points that you do, and you can rotate hands. And those you do as a preventative measure. Now, the Korean hand acupuncture, that is a specific type of acupuncture that is not taught in like Changi in the Korean medical school is mostly for the lay people. The lay people are basically allowed to do that. They can even needle these points in these so-called free clinics. And roughly about 2 million people in Korea practice this. 2 million people. These are lay people. There's no charge for it. So it's like a community health type of operation where you donate your time and you can practice this method. So, a lot of elderly people, they do it themselves. They put the moxa little stick-ons and they do it for prevention. And it's part of the culture, or was up to maybe more recently, but it's been done for many, many years.
I'm delighted to hear you talk about this, Jacques, because I remember learning Korean hand acupuncture when I was in school.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I went to a school that it taught us a bunch of different things. The idea was, of course, to prepare us for the test.
Yes.
But they didn't let that get in the way of teaching us how to do acupuncture.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So we learned Japanese acupuncture, we learned some Korean hand acupuncture.
Great.
A number of different methods, different kinds of Japanese acupuncture.
Yes.
All kinds of stuff. And I remember being really interested in it for a period of time, but then it just, how things are. Things fall by the wayside and you don't even think about it.
Yeah. No, the Korean hand acupuncture is very powerful. And I can say to you, I don't know if you use the Manaka. Have you heard of Manaka, Dr. Manaka, and the iron cords?
I am familiar with the iron cords.
Yeah. So there is of course, talking about, yes, I do use the Korean constitutional, but I also use the Manaka. So you see all the toolkit getting bigger and bigger. I love to use the Manaka iron cords on the so-called infinity treatment, where you would where you will hook up the cord on SI3 and bladder 62 with the different polarities, and then kidney 6 and lung 7, and then you circulate the chi in the chimai, or the extraordinary channel. That's Dr. Manaka's treatment. Now you can replicate Dr. Manaka's treatment with the Korean hand, where the patient can go home with magnets put on the specific pointer with a north and south polarity. So you can do the Manaka treatment and they can go home with the Manaka treatment and keep it on for a few days. So I've done that a lot. I've done that a lot on my
Interesting.
patients.
And then, but you
way back in the day.
So you would reverse the polarity for the black lead and positive for the red one?
Well, the magnets, those Korean hand magnets, they come for the north facing down when you peel them off. The ones that come in the 50 packs from Korea, those good ones. So they come with the north facing. So if you want to get the positive lead, then you reverse the magnet and you put it on the positive charge.
And that's what you do?
So which would be you would do the left and right hand.
What a great thing to send people home with.
Yeah. And people really like that.
Simple.
And to tell you on a more interesting aspect, I used to do it on the swimmers of the swim team of the high school, and they would get a better score on their swim team. It would improve their swim.
Uh-huh.
And they had no idea. They were young, teenage kids, and that can improve their performance and their stamina. Of course, you're working on the ren and do with the yin and yang chao, so it obviously will help you. Yeah, so they and the waterproof tape.
And all you have to do is get a Korean hand acupuncture map, and we know where everything is because we're acupuncturists, right?
Yeah, acupuncturists can do it. It's not all that easy because you have the 3 different lines. The numbering system is not the same, so it's not. It doesn't match. So you have to, it can easily be done with.
You've got to do some conversion.
Yeah, and it works really well. But for some strange reason, the Korean hand has really not taken hold so much. You hear so much about Master Dung acupuncture, a lot of seminars and CUs, but the Korean hand is not didn't take off that much, in my opinion. It could have done much better, or can still do much better.
It's so interesting. Now, I want to come back for just a second to this treatment that you do for yourself. So CV 4612.
Yes. Yeah.
All that makes sense to me. Do you also do any points for the Do channel, or are you just
Oh, CV, no. CV 4688, CV8 would be,
468.
yeah, 8 would be,
Oh, the umbilicus.
yeah, for those numbers, A8, it's the A line. So A4, A6, A8, A12. Up to there, it matches. Then when you go past the CB17, after that, the numbers change, of course, because they have other points.
Okay.
Up to 833 is the last point on that line, which is the DUMAI, do 20.
So you just do these 3 points, 468.
4 points, 4 points. Yeah. I mean, that's what I do for myself. That,
Wait a minute. Wait, what? 4 points? I missed one.
yeah, A4, A6, A8, and A12.
A4.
A6, A8.
Oh, and A12. Okay, got it. All right.
And A12. Yeah, that's CB4, 6, 8, and 12. With the Moxa stick, usually do 5 to 7 of them. 7. That's what traditionally they do that.
Nothing on the do. You just treat the ren.
Yeah.
Which is also the pericardium in this system.
Yeah, it's the pericardium. But interesting enough, when you look at CV8 or A8, you actually are right behind the Ming Men point. So on the back of the hand, there's the B line, which is the Ming Men.
Right.
So that Ming Men is really, really important. And when you look at auricular acupuncture and you see 0.0, you heard of 0.0.
Of course.
Or 0 point. There's 2.0s. Most people only know about 1.0. There's also...
I only know of one of them.
Huh? Yeah, there's also...
I only know about one.
Yeah, there is also 0 prime, which is in the tragus, the pretragal area. Also, very often you see it as the laterality point or oscillation point, or basically, in some books, it's close to the vitality point. Basically, it's a point that works with the right and left hemisphere, because the whole tragal area is, the tragus is the corpus callosum. So that's a really important point. But in terms of the regular 0.0 is CV8. And so that's why it's such an important point. And in Nogier's system, that 0.0 is a good point to use at the end of the treatment to stabilize the treatment. So bring it back, because that CV8 is and 0.0, that idea of being connected to the womb, that womb feeling that you might have had when you were in the womb. So it gives that connection. That's what Dr. Terry Olson, a good friend of mine, mentioned to me, and he actually wrote it in his book too. Yeah. So he's also an old-timer. Terry Olson, one of amazing faculty here at Empress College. He was in the very first group of researcher at UCLA, and that was the very first medical school that did the acupuncture research using auricular acupuncture.
Yes. Now, you mentioned earlier in our conversation about the acupuncture project at UCLA.
Yeah,
What was that?
It was an acupuncture project, the pain control unit. It was at the bottom of the psychology building. They had it way down, almost at the basement, because they would use moxibustion there. And everybody thought these guys are like smoking stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, down there smoking dope. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and that was the very first acupuncture unit in any university in the United States, was at UCLA. Yes.
How did that get started?
I am not 100% sure on the exact time frame, because when I was studying acupuncture and of course took the first exam, that unit had been going on for a few years. So, I know Richard Cronin was an MD. I think he might have been an anesthesiologist, and also he had a PhD in, I don't remember in what. So he was the head of that unit. And then they had like individuals like Terry Olson, who was a research physiologist and neuroscientist that would do some of the auricular experiments. So that's where they did the first experiments, where they actually had patients come in that would not mention any of their symptoms, and they would scan the ear with an electrical detector and with a probe and find out certain areas, and they would have I think a 70% match on their issues, whatever, if it was a musculoskeletal issue.
Wait, what percent?
Like 70%, a very high match.
70%, that's not bad.
Yeah, no, it's a very good match just from palpating, and with early
yes, it is
detection machines and palpation. Sometimes something of in that nature. I don't remember exactly, but it was very good. Yeah, so that was the very first research on auricular acupuncture that was done at UCLA. Yeah, and Cronin was an amazing pioneer and leader of our medicine, and he was on the very first acupuncture board in the state of California in 1977, 76, I think.
So this group, so Terry Olson came out of that group. I've got his book. I've had his book for almost 30 years.
Yeah, that's his book. Yeah, but it has different edition. You need to get the new edition that revised it and upgraded it. Yeah, that's his good book. Yeah, that's Terry Olson, who is a psychologist, by the way. He only does auricular as a side, but he's not needling. He does some, seeds or some laser treatment on it or electrical stim. But he's not an acupuncturist there. He's mostly a psychologist.
He's mostly a psychologist, and yet, he created a book.
Yes, he did because of all the research, and he's gone to all the conferences. He's a world-renowned authority in auricular acupuncture and so on and so forth. Of course, when he's doing the auricular acupuncture out of California, he does the acupuncture, but in California, he is not considered an acupuncturist, even though he could have grandfathered because of his UCLA research for a number of years. And some people did grandfather because of UCLA research. Grandfather meaning that you show proof that you've had 3 years of clinical experience, and then you could quote unquote get grandfather. But there were only a few hundred people that passed the test.
Right, and in the early years.
Yeah, the very early years. That's prior. Yeah.
I've often wondered about auricular acupuncture. I mean, look, it's used a lot with...
Yes, absolutely.
Like Acupuncturists Without Borders, it's used, the NADA protocol.
Yes, the NADA, yes.
These things are very, very helpful. But I've often thought about, I've got friends that are like psychotherapists. Sometimes we'll consult with each other about different cases and things. Even though I'm an acupuncturist and, they're psychotherapists, we still kind of compare notes and maybe you can help your patient with them. And I've often thought, man, I got a couple of friends, like if they could just put a little stimulation into the ear of their patients, it might make a therapy session go a little bit smoother.
Absolutely. Actually, if they can just point a point like in the prefrontal cortex, what you might have seen in the comprehensive text, the Shanghai text as the neurasthenia point or the stress point, they can put an ear seed on. That's not the...
Yeah, they couldn't they?
Yeah, that's non-invasive, and that can be a good de-stressor. We're not talking about the more, I would say the more aggressive, but not necessarily correct word. What is that for?
Right, more invasive.
Yeah, like the ASP, aiguille semi-permanente. These are the ones we use at the VA.
Yes, I know the battlefield acupuncture use. Those.
Yeah, they use the ASP.
Those scare me a little bit because.
Don't be scared. But
really, well, here's the thing. Sometimes I don't get the needle in exactly where it should be.
No,
you can't really take those. You can't really take those things out.
No, do not take those out. They're not meant to be taken out.
No, they're not meant to be taken out.
Most people do not know this. Never, ever take out those needles.
No, I understand. They're supposed to fall out on their own.
The interesting thing is when the body is done with them, when you no longer need that point, then it will fall out. I have.
Oh, you've got one. Oh, I see it.
You see them?
I thought, I see it. Yeah, you're wearing one as we speak.
I have a...
Okay. Yep.
I actually, with one of our students, we have a table tennis in our courtyard here, and I was playing table tennis. I hadn't picked up a paddle in 30 years, and I was doing backhand, and I stressed my shoulder. So I said, I need these points. Yeah, I need these points. Now,
you need this point.
But mostly, no, for health and well-being, I'm going to tell you very simply what my preferred therapy or method is: Tai Chi. No matter what you say, I go back to Tai Chi. Tai Chi has so much evidence behind it. When I went to China to study Tai Chi in those days, I said, that's only for elderly people, for seniors. And there was so few evidence for Tai Chi. Going back to the original fall prevention study was done by Rosalind and Jimmy Carter's Tai Chi teachers. Did you know that Rosalind Carter practiced Tai Chi every day till her 90s, I believe?
I did not know this, but Jimmy Carter just celebrated 100 years, so...
Yeah, he did it, but he did not do it regularly. But he had done Tai Chi back in I think in the 80s. But yeah, no, my recommendation from my personal experience and what I've seen over the years, definitely do the Tai Chi. Tai Chi is top.
Okay. And your Korean hand, Moxa.
Korean hand Moxa is good.
What else have you got? Look, you've been at this a long time. What are a few other simple health things?
Okay, I'll tell you the one herb. You could have a practice with one herb.
Coffee.
Yeah, that's good. Eleutherococcus senecos.
I don't know what that is.
It's not exactly what it is in Chinese. Siwujia or wujiasen. Eleutro. It's also very often said as Siberian ginseng. Is not Siberian, but the high quality.
And what is it that you love about this?
It's the number one adaptogen, the king of adaptogens. The Soviet Union had 1,200 scientists for 40 years doing research on it during the time of the Soviet Empire. Can you imagine? Present cost of research of that would be the equivalent of $5 billion of research. It was the very first herb that went to space. It
went to space.
Yeah, it was
the herb that went to space.
Yeah, in other words, the cosmonaut.
It's a cosmonaut.
They used that, and they beat all those records where the Americans were using amphetamines and they were not staying up that long. But they were using the Eleutro in space. It was supposed to be a top secret herb, but the Eleutro is the number one by far. I used to prescribe it to all my AIDS patients way back in the days when there was nothing else for them. But unfortunately, there's very grim 18 months left to live. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Those are some very helpful things.
Yes, the Eleutro is good, and of course I also like Lingshire or Gonoderma, the Lingshire mushroom.
The reishi.
Yeah, reishi. That's really good. Those two are the tops from my experience in the pharmacopoeia. Of course, you have to keep an open mind because you can take all the reishi, all the Lingshire, all the Eleutro, all the acupuncture, but if your vitamin D levels are low, you better take the vitamin D. That's where you have to get some blood work and see if your vitamin levels are D, you're not going to get enough just going out and getting a little sun for 20, 30, 40 minutes a day or even 1 or 2 hours a day. You have to get your vitamin D levels checked. And in France, in the early days of COVID, they found out there was a research study. They found out that all the French retirement homes, they would get a shot of 100,000 units of vitamin D once every 3 months. And they found out that the individuals that had the shot, very few of them would end up with serious health complication of COVID right after the shot. But the ones that were waiting for the shot, they would be very sick. So,
that's an interesting.
There was a direct correlation between the vitamin D levels and the severity of the COVID. Yeah,
there was a lot of talk during the early days of COVID about vitamin D, but if you talked about vitamin D early in COVID, you were a nutcase.
But not anymore. The science is proven. The science has proven it, and that's a whole other subject.
Yes, it is. And not one for this conversation.
Yeah, not at all. We are acupuncturists.
Which has been delightful. Thank you. So 50 years, I'm curious. I mean, that's a long run.
No, I'm still here.
Yes, and I've got a visual image of you, and you look pretty dang vital too. So.
Oh, you're so kind, Michael. So kind.
So there's that. Must be those needles in your ear.
The needles in my ears, yes. My gold needles. By the way, our veterans love those gold studs. I say
they're helpful for the pain, aren't they?
Yeah. It's for stress, for PTSD, and for pain, of course.
Yeah. So you've seen acupuncture, East Asian medicine, through sort of from the beginning as it was emerging. You've had your hand in it these past 50 years. I want you to peer into the future, maybe share with us a few thoughts. This is a little provocative. I know a lot of schools have closed recently. I think there's a lot of people talking about, well, where's our profession headed? There's some challenges up ahead. I think every generation has its own challenges. So fair enough on that. But, as you look down the road with East Asian medicine and acupuncture, what do you see as some of the challenges that are worth taking on and that need to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there has been some sad news in terms of some of the closures, as you mentioned. Here at Emperor's College, we have expanded. We're in a beautiful new location in Culver City. I think the key thing here is integration. You have to be able to integrate into the medical system. And the leader for us right now is the VA. If the VA has accepted as part of the Whole Health Initiative, if the VA is hiring acupuncturists in the 159 VAs around the country, that I think is the first step, is to be integrated in the system. Now, places like the Cancer Centers of America, the City of Hope, all those Sloan Kettering, all those cutting edge centers are having acupuncturists on staff. So that's important. So areas of focus, but also let's not forget one of the key important aspects of our medicine is the preventative aspects of our medicine. And that's where we're super strong.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's nothing out there that can match the whole aspect of Chinese, Korean, or let's say East Asian medicine with all the toolkits that they have at hand, such as Tai Chi, Qigong, herbal medicine, dietetics, acupuncture. Let's not forget moxibustion. Unfortunately, I think moxibustion is almost becoming like a dying art. I see very few people using it. If you're in a medical office tower and you have no ventilation and cannot open your windows, you can use it. I mean, it's almost on the endangered list, I would say. But all those aspects, the hands-on, the Trina, the Ama, amazing. The cupping. A lot of these modalities are being absorbed by other professions.
Yes, they've been co-opted. There's this thing called Graston technique.
That's right.
Which is really gua sha, except they use extremely expensive tools.
Mm-hmm.
It's like $3,000 for a set of their tools.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and then there's the cupping, which is called, what they call it, reverse. I forgot the name. Reverse myofascial suction, something like that. There's a whole term for it. It's cupping.
I'm sure there is,
but it's a term that the PTs. And then, of course, we are faced with this whole issue of dry needling, which is nothing else but acupuncture. Acupuncture is dry needling, and there's nothing special about it. Of course, this the more into the trigger points or the Asher points, which are trigger points. But the future is the integration. I think that's the only way that's going to move forward, and not to speak just in TCM terms. So when you're talking about a herb, you better know the Latin botanical name. What about the constituents of the herb? What about the active ingredients on the herb? What about, let's say, the ginsenosides or the polysaccharides of the lincture? What about some of the trace minerals that some of these herbs have and their benefits in the natural phase? So all those things are really important. So we have to be able to communicate and get the respect that we need and we deserve. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate your perspective on that. Well, Jacques, this has been a delight. Thank you for joining me for a little conversation here on Qiological.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you're doing for our professions. And it's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you.
It's been a delight.
Take care. Minyan.
Take care.
Minyan.
下一次见. Well, friends, that's it for this History Series conversation. There's a lot in this talk with Jacques that got my attention. One being the influence of the French-Vietnamese connection and how it shaped the transmission of Chinese medicine into the West via France. It brought acupuncture to the attention of the mainstream medical doctors long before it was paid attention to here in the USA. It makes me want to go look more closely at some of those old currents of acupuncture. Jacques' early exposure to the Korean lineages brought a depth and texture to his practice that you can't get from textbooks, especially when textbooks don't exist in a language that you can read. I was also reminded of how when you're curious about something, there's all kinds of synchronistic cross-pollination that seems to occur. I'm thinking about his connection with the UCLA Pain Control Unit, which is where another recent guest of the podcast, Stephen Rosenblatt, began to cut his teeth on acupuncture. And then there's his emphasis on simplicity, which is something I've found myself more and more interested in as time goes by. How profound results can come from just a few well-placed needles. For me, it's a powerful reminder that we need to seek clarity with our diagnosis and treatment, adding extra points, air quotes here, to cover the bases, or thinking that we might be helpful with a more means better attitude. I found it doesn't work. A clear message to the body that basically says, I see you, that has a potency. Good medicine, it doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be skillfully and attentively applied. As with all these history series conversations, I'm impressed with the vision, stamina, or perhaps just plain old bullheadedness of the people like Jacques who found something that interested them and continue to unfold that interest. Not an easy road for sure, but certainly it's one worth traveling. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.